John Lennon stopped the recording session for a crying fan outside the studio. Here is why. Abbey Road Studios, London, October 1968, 2:47 a.m. The red recording light had been on for 6 hours straight. John Lennon sat at the piano in Studio 2, headphones covering his ears, working through the bridge of a song that was tearing him apart from the inside. Raw, honest, painful. The kind of music that made even hardened studio engineers uncomfortable. Paul had gone home hours ago, frustrated. George had left after another argument about arrangements. Ringo was asleep on the couch in the corner, and John was alone with his demons and a melody that wouldn't let him rest. He was about to start another take when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong, not from the instruments, not from the equipment, from outside. Someone was crying. Not the usual fan tears of excitement or joy. This was different. This was the sound of someone breaking. John pulled off his headphones and listened. There it was again, muffled, desperate, coming from somewhere beyond the studio walls. "Jeff," John said to the engineer, "you hear that?" Jeff Emmerich looked up from the mixing desk. "Hear what?" "That crying. Outside." "John, it's 3 in the morning. There's nobody outside." But John was already standing up, walking toward the door. "John, we're in the middle of a session." "The session can wait," John said quietly. "Someone needs help." What John Lennon did next would never appear in any official Beatles biography, but it would change 2 lives forever. His own, and the life of a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Thompson, who was sitting on the steps outside Abbey Road Studios, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Sarah Thompson had been waiting outside Abbey Road Studios for 14 hours, not because she was a typical fan hoping for an autograph, because she had nowhere else to go. 3 days earlier, Sarah's mother had died. Cancer. Sudden. Devastating. 2 days earlier, her father had told her he couldn't handle raising a teenage daughter alone, that she needed to find somewhere else to live. Yesterday, she'd been kicked out of her aunt's house for being too much trouble. Now, at 17 years old, Sarah was homeless, heartbroken, and completely alone in London. She'd come to Abbey Road because it was the only place she could think of that felt safe, and the Beatles' music had been her refuge during her mother's illness. John Lennon's voice, specifically, had been the only thing that made her feel less alone. So she'd walked to Abbey Road Studios and sat down on the steps, not hoping to see the Beatles, just hoping to be near something that had brought her comfort. For 14 hours, she'd sat there, through the afternoon, through the evening, through the night. Security had asked her to leave twice. She'd moved to a different spot each time, but she always came back, because she had nowhere else to go. By 3 a.m., the exhaustion, the grief, the fear of what came next had finally broken through her defenses. And Sarah Thompson, sitting alone on the steps of Abbey Road Studios, began to cry. Not quietly, not politely, the kind of crying that comes from the soul, the kind that John Lennon, working late in Studio 2, could hear through the walls. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful, like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon walked out of Abbey Road Studios at 3:07 a.m. and found Sarah sitting on the steps, her face buried in her hands. "Hey," John said softly. "You all right, love?" Sarah's head snapped up, and when she saw John Lennon standing there in his denim jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, she thought she was hallucinating. I'm sorry," Sarah stammered, trying to wipe her face. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I'll go." "Hold on," John said, sitting down on the steps beside her. "I didn't say you had to go. I asked if you were all right." Sarah stared at him. This was John Lennon, the John Lennon, and he was sitting next to her on the steps at 3 in the morning, asking if she was okay. "I'm fine," Sarah lied. "No, you're not," John said gently. "Nobody cries like that if they're fine. What's your name?" "Sarah." "Sarah, that's a good name. I'm John." Despite everything, Sarah almost laughed. "I know who you are." "Right. A stupid question." John pulled out a cigarette, then offered one to Sarah. She shook her head. "So, Sarah, want to tell me why you're sitting outside a recording studio at 3 in the morning crying your eyes out?" Sarah looked at this man who'd written songs that had saved her life, and something about the genuine concern in his voice made her tell the truth. "My mum died 3 days ago. My dad kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." The words hung in the cold October air. John was quiet for a long moment. "How old are you?" 17. "Bloody hell," John said quietly. 17 years old, and you've lost everything." "I'm sorry," Sarah said again. "I shouldn't have come here. Your music helped me when Mum was sick, and I thought maybe being near the place where you made it would help me feel less alone." John looked at this girl, this child really, who had lost her mother and her home, and was sitting on cold stone steps in the middle of the night because Beatles music was the only comfort she had left. "Come with me," John said, standing up. "What?" "I said come with me. You're not staying out here in the cold." John brought Sarah into Abbey Road Studios. Jeff Emerick looked shocked. "John, we can't just bring random people into the studio." "She's not random," John interrupted. "She's Sarah, and she's staying." John guided Sarah to the couch where Ringo was sleeping and gently woke him up. "Ringo, this is Sarah. Sarah, this is Ringo. Sarah's going to sit in on our session tonight." Ringo, still half asleep, just nodded. "All right then. Oh, hello, Sarah." Sarah sat on the couch, completely overwhelmed. She was inside Abbey Road Studios, where the Beatles recorded, where magic happened, and John Lennon had stopped his recording session to bring her in from the cold. "You hungry?" John asked. Sarah realized she hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. She nodded. John sent someone to get food. Then he sat down at the piano. "What I'm working on tonight," John said, "is pretty heavy. It's about my mum. She died when I was 17. Same age you are now." Sarah's eyes widened. "So I understand a bit of what you're going through," John continued, "and I'm going to play you what I've been working on. But I want you to know, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel everything you're feeling. There's no shame in grief." What John played for Sarah that night was an early version of what would become one of his most powerful songs about loss and abandonment. As he sang, Sarah began to cry again, but this time she wasn't crying alone. When John finished playing, he sat down next to Sarah on the couch. "Your mum," John said quietly. "Tell me about her." And Sarah did. For the next hour, while Jeff Emerick and Ringo listened quietly, Sarah told John about her mother, about how she'd fought cancer for 2 years, about how she'd stayed positive until the end, about how her last words were "Be brave, my darling." But I'm not brave, Sarah sobbed. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. Being terrified doesn't mean you're not brave, John said, putting an arm around her shoulders. It means you're human. And your mum was right. You are brave. You're sitting here, telling your story to a bunch of strangers when you could be hiding. That's bravery. But what do I do now? John looked at Ringo. Ringo looked at Jeff. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, love, John said. Tonight, you just need to be safe and warm and not alone. He paused. Do you have any family? Any friends you can stay with? Sarah shook her head. No one. John thought for a moment. Then he made a decision. You're coming home with me. Sarah looked up, shocked. What? You heard me. You're coming to stay with me and Yoko tonight. We'll figure things out in the morning, but you're not spending another minute on the streets. Jeff Emmerich looked like he was about to protest. Ringo just nodded, because they both knew that when John Lennon made up his mind, there was no changing it, and they both knew that John, for all his tough exterior, had a heart that broke for people who were hurting. John brought Sarah home to his apartment in Mayfair. Yoko Ono, surprised to find a teenage girl in her living room at 4 a.m., listened patiently as John explained the situation. She needs a place to stay, Yoko, John said. Just for a bit, until we can figure something out. Yoko looked at Sarah, then at John. She saw the genuine concern in his eyes, the vulnerability, the compassion. Of course, Yoko said, her voice soft. She can stay as long as she needs. Sarah stayed with John and Yoko for 3 weeks. During that time, John helped her navigate the bureaucracy of social services. He called lawyers. He pulled strings. He used his fame and influence to make sure Sarah got the help she needed. He also spent hours talking to her, listening to her grief, sharing his own stories of loss and abandonment. John never treated me like a charity case, Sarah later recalled. He treated me like a person, like a friend. He listened to me in a way no one else ever had. Yoko, too, was incredibly kind. She cooked for Sarah, bought her new clothes, taught her about art and philosophy. They helped Sarah find a small flat of her own, helped her enroll in college, helped her get a part-time job. They didn't just give her a place to stay, they gave her a future. And John, for his part, found something he hadn't realized he was missing. A connection, a purpose beyond music, a reminder that his fame could be used for good. The song he'd been working on that night, the one about his mother, was eventually finished. And when it was released, it was filled with a new depth, a new understanding of grief and resilience. Because John Lennon had stopped his recording session for a crying fan outside the studio. And in doing so, he'd found a piece of himself he thought he'd lost forever. Sarah Thompson went on to become a successful social worker, dedicating her life to helping homeless youth in London. John and Yoko saved my life, Sarah said in an interview decades later. They didn't just give me a roof over my head, they gave me hope. They showed me that even when you feel completely alone, there are people who care. She never forgot that night on the steps of Abbey Road. I was just a crying girl, Sarah recalled, and he was John Lennon. He could have ignored me. He could have sent security. But he didn't. He stopped everything. And he listened. John Lennon, before his death, never spoke publicly about Sarah. He never sought credit for his kindness. But those close to him knew the story. And they knew that the encounter with Sarah had profoundly impacted him. John always had a soft spot for the underdog, Yoko Ono said in a rare comment about the incident. He understood what it felt like to be lost and alone. And when he saw that in Sarah, he couldn't turn away. The story of John Lennon stopping his recording session for a crying fan outside Abbey Road Studios is not widely known. It's not in the official biographies, it's not taught in music history classes, but it's a story that speaks to the true heart of John Lennon, the man behind the legend, the artist who cared more about human connection than chart positions, the rebel who, when faced with someone in pain, chose compassion over convenience. Today, there's no plaque on the steps of Abbey Road commemorating that night, no official record of Sarah Thompson's tears or John Lennon's kindness. But those who know the story understand something important, that sometimes the most powerful act an artist can perform isn't on a stage or in a studio. It's on a cold stone step, in the middle of the night, when they stop everything and just listen. The recording from that night was never released. The song John was working on became a classic, but the real masterpiece wasn't the music. It was the moment a rock star chose humanity over fame and saved a life. If this story about compassion, connection, and the power of stopping everything to help someone in need moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that kindness can change lives. What moment made you realize the true impact of a simple act of compassion? Tell us in the comments below.